Joe Biden's risky strategy to win the White House. Hi there, I'm Jeff, and I am ready to go here for another plain English lesson. This is the time of the week where we get to spend about 20 or 30 minutes together talking about what's going on in the world. It's my favorite time of week, recording these, and the fun continues on the website at plainenglish.com/314, where JR, the producer, has posted the full transcript, video lesson, translations, and exercises. plainenglish.com/314. Coming up today, it was an extraordinary gamble, but Joe Biden's strategy to win the presidential election paid off. He bet that his best way to win was to contrast himself with Trump and to run a socially distant campaign. We'll take you through his big decisions on today's lesson. In the second half, we have a great expression, make or break, and we have a quote of the week. Joe Biden's journey to the White House was anything but smooth. His first attempt at the presidency started in June 1987 when the then senator ran for the Democratic nomination. In nomination races, candidates try to be one of the two finalists in the race. Biden's first attempt ended just 3 months later after one of his speeches closely resembled a speech by a British politician. He was forced to pull out of the race. His second attempt came in 2007. He had better luck that time, but when the voting started, he didn't receive much support and he dropped out. However, he did make enough of an impression on the eventual winner, Barack Obama. Obama chose him to be his running mate in 2008, and Biden served 8 years as vice president. It would have been natural for him to run for the top job himself in 2016. As sitting vice president, he would have been able to ride Obama's coattails and promise to continue the policies of a popular administration. But he had recently lost his son, Beau, to brain cancer, and he was still grieving. And Hillary Clinton was a political force to be reckoned with. She was the early favorite to be the Democrats' nominee. So Biden sat out the race, and for the first time since 1969, Joe Biden did not hold public office. In his mid-70s, his long career in politics seemed to be over. So you can imagine the surprise when he decided to throw his hat in the ring in 2019 ahead of the 2020 election. Everyone could do the math. If he won, he would be the oldest ever to take office. The competition for the Democratic nomination was fierce. Democrats of all stripes salivated at the opportunity to be the one to beat Donald Trump in what was expected to be an easy election. If Biden wanted to win the nomination, he'd have to beat a wide field of competitive Democrats. Biden's 2020 campaign got off to a lethargic start. We detailed his road to the nomination in Lesson 242, but he won a few key endorsements and several other candidates dropped out of the race at the same time. Support coalesced around the former vice president as Democratic voters saw him as the safest, most electable candidate in an important election. That's when his race against Trump really started, and it's also when the pandemic started, upending all the traditional rules about campaigning. Early on, Biden made a strategic decision that he would present himself as Trump's opposite. He also decided to respect social distancing and run his campaign remotely, foregoing large rallies, extensive travel, and boots-on-the-ground grassroots campaigning. It was a risky strategy that just barely worked. Start with his first decision. He would present himself as Trump's temperamental opposite. Unlike Obama in 2008 and unlike Trump in 2016, Biden did not run on any big philosophical ideas. He did not promise big societal changes. I've mentioned before, the more ideological wing of the Democratic Party is hungry for sweeping changes to public policy. Biden purposely did not embrace the more radical proposals in his party. He published a document outlining his policy priorities and then almost never mentioned them. When pressed on specific issues, he refused to commit himself one way or another. He would only say that he would study issues, listen to experts, and seek compromise. In other words, he would be Trump's opposite. Here's an example. When the protests against police violence flared up, many in the progressive wing of the party advocated for cutting police budgets and moving the funds toward more social services. They rallied around the slogan, "Defund the police," and they pressured Biden to adopt their cause. He wisely refused. Instead, he promised to address police violence and discrimination without saying exactly what he would do. He then said he would seek compromise while Trump was stoking divisions. Biden's bet was that people disliked Trump's approach, so he shrewdly positioned himself as Trump's opposite, without having to defend any firm policy positions of his own. Throughout the campaign, as Trump downplayed the severity of COVID-19 and disparaged medical experts, Biden again played the opposite. He said he would listen to and respect medical experts. It's widely accepted that the Trump administration was slow to respond to the threat of COVID-19 and botched the federal government's response. But Biden didn't advocate materially different positions throughout most of the pandemic. There were no big Biden ideas on how to deal with COVID. His message was that he'd be more competent than Trump and listen to experts. that same attitude extended to the campaign itself, and this, I think, was very important. Traditional presidential campaigning is a high-touch activity. The candidates crisscross the country, host large rallies, sit for media interviews, visit diners, kiss babies, tour factories, and shake as many hands as possible. Trump was a germaphobe before it became popular, so shaking hands was never his style. You almost never saw him shake a voter's hand. But he continued to host his signature rallies, often indoors and with a crowd not wearing masks. Republicans also mobilized supporters to knock on voters' doors in key states, a classic American campaigning tradition. Armies of volunteers, checklists, and mobile apps in hand disperse across the neighborhoods, knocking on doors, urging their supporters to vote on Election Day. This is called Get Out the Vote campaigning, and it can make or break a candidate in a close race. Republicans were doing it in force. Democrats, respecting social distancing, largely were not. This strategy infuriated some veteran Democratic campaigners, but Biden knew that he couldn't say he was Trump's opposite and then mimic Trump in his campaigning style. He bet that the American voters wanted a candidate who followed his own advice and that of scientists. Biden bet that running a remote campaign would be the image American voters wanted in a president, since all of us were working remotely too. When Trump and a slew of his advisors all got COVID from a White House event, Biden looked like the savvy statesman. He looked like the person Americans wanted to be in charge. It just barely worked. I mentioned last week that Biden won, but that Republicans did very well in legislative elections. That means a lot of people split their tickets. A lot of people voted for Biden to be president, but for the opposite party in the legislature. If Biden had boldly staked out radical policy positions, he almost definitely would have lost. His big advantage was his personal contrast with Trump. It was the one and only thing he ran on, and it was enough. I wanted to highlight one feature of the Plain English Plus membership for you, and that is our forums. Specifically, we have an online message board where all Plus members can ask me anything in English, and I will answer. The reason I included this in the membership is that I know from my experience in Spanish, I sometimes read something and it just doesn't click. I stare at the words and I say, huh? What? What are they doing this for? Now I have people I can ask. I have a Spanish teacher and I have a Spanish-speaking producer of this very program. But I know not everyone has that, so I added this feature just for those times when you're wondering how to say something in English, or you read something and you just don't know what something means. It could be something big or small. Now, recently, a Plain English Plus member asked, what's the difference between a report of and a report on? They're just one little letter different, but they mean two very different things. And someone else asked why you would describe an office as light and airy. So I thought those were two perfect questions for the Ask Anything forum, and it was my pleasure to answer them. So, if you find yourself with questions like that, then consider joining us as a member of Plain English Plus, and you'll get to ask me any question you want in English, and I'll respond so that you and your fellow Plus members can all benefit from the answer. To join, just visit plainenglish.com/plus, Plus. Today's expression is make or break. In today's lesson, I said that get out the vote efforts can make or break a political campaign. These efforts are all about connecting one-on-one with individual voters and encouraging them to go vote on Election Day. You can run the best campaign in the world, but if your voters don't go to their polling places and cast their votes, then you won't win. So the candidates get lists of supporters, and they call them and they visit them in person. This type of campaigning can make or break a campaign. What do I mean by this? I mean that this could be the one thing that causes a campaign to win or lose. In a close election, with roughly equal numbers of supporters on both sides, the one factor that could cause one side to win could be this get out the vote effort. That could make or break the campaign. That could be the one thing that separates victory from defeat. What day is today? It is November 23rd, and that means some very important shopping weeks are coming up for retailers around the world. In fact, some people say that Black Friday can make or break a retailer's year. If they have a good Black Friday, then they have a good year. If they have a bad Black Friday, then they have a bad year. Imagine, a year is 52 weeks, but just this 1 week separates a good year from a bad year. Black Friday performance can make or break a retailer's year. That's a lot of pressure. The football team I root for is the Chicago Bears. They had a good beginning of the season, followed by a few very tough losses. They now have 3 important games against division rivals. Many people are saying the next 3 games can make or break their season. If they do well in the next 3 games, then they will probably end up with a good season. If they do badly in the next 3 games, well, their season is likely going to end in disappointment. These 3 games will be the difference between a good season and a bad season. So these games can make or break the Bears' season. Customer service can make or break a company's reputation. Picture two companies. They both make products you like for an affordable price, but one has good customer service while one has terrible customer service. Customer service usually isn't the first thing you think about when buying a product or service, but it can make or break a company in a competitive industry. If 2 or 3 companies are all about the same, then customer service can make or break a company's reputation. If you provide good service, then you'll gain loyal customers. Bad service, and you could be trending on social media and not in a good way. I had a quote of the week in mind for this week, which I thought was first uttered by Winston Churchill. And as I was investigating the quote, I discovered that this famous Churchill quote may in fact not be authentic, but it was based on an authentic quote, so I'll give you the real one. It is by the Israeli diplomat Abba Eban. Here's what he said. "My experience teaches me this. Men and nations do act wisely when they have exhausted all the other possibilities." That's clever. Men and nations act wisely. They do the right thing only when they have exhausted all the other possibilities. Meaning, yes, they'll do the right thing only when they have tried all the other options. And I thought this quote would be especially appropriate around this election. We'll do the right thing only after we've tried all the alternatives. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. Remember, anything you want to ask is fair game as a member of Plain English Plus in our forums. Now, I didn't mean to leave you hanging before. A report on something is a report describing that thing. A report of something is like an unconfirmed rumor. Just one letter difference, but a big difference in meaning. And that's just one example of the types of questions I can answer for you in the forums at Plain English Plus. So to join us there and to get our full library of video lessons and exercises, come join us at plainenglish.com/plus, Plus. Coming up on Thursday, good news in the race for a COVID vaccine. You'll want to join us for that one. Some good news for once.